Hi, I'm Samantha Mackay. Welcome to the next episode of Creativity in the Enneagram. Today I'm talking with Wend Brand, a sexual 8 and ENTP in the Myers-Briggs system, about her art and how that came to be and all the wonderful things that she knows about creativity. So thanks for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
So what does creativity mean to you?
Creativity has been an engine running in me that I haven't ever that I hadn't ever understood as something irrepressible. Uh I always hear other people talk about it as oh, I'm feeling creative that this week or today or something. And um looking back retrospectively at my life, it is the intuitive gut engine running every moment of my experience.
Wow,
um
okay.
to creatively respond to any impetus or information that I'm hit with. I see something and I want to think differently about it. I feel something and I want to know, can I feel more than one way about this? It's just something that I didn't understand. I wasn't putting it on like I hear other people talk about it. And when I've suffered the most in my life is when I'm trying to ride the brakes on that.
Okay.
And uh I had a block against allowing myself to draw. And there was something about that was making me it was a sort of wound that was continuing,
Mm,
not uh getting taken care of. Now, creativity was still spilling over into every other part of my life, but I had compartmentalized, the action of drawing into this other place that, um, if I want to think about it through type and Enneagram, I felt like it was, what I would eventually draw would be too aggressive. It would be too confrontational, and
mm,
felt the fallout all throughout my life for, saying a true thing, is can create
mm.
um a lot of her feelings and fallout and confusion and intimidation around me. And I've been most of my life trying to figure out how to stop that, instead of
Mm.
ending how to transform it a little bit, you know um so the main thing I want to get back to, what I was saying at the beginning, um is that I with feedback from my friends and looking back at my life, um creativity for me is like a fire hose trying to get out in every corner of how I experience things.
That's I'm finding that fascinating because I am speaking to quite a few sexual dominant types, and that is sort of that common theme when just don't have that same experience. And I love this sense of how it's sort of just exuding like this energy that's just in everything and coming out in everything. And oh, wow, amazing. So and I love how you just explained that psychological block withdrawing. And so, even though creativity is flowing in everything, there is still this capacity to have wounding that blocks certain types of creative expression. And I know that you've been getting back into or really exploring that side of yourself in the last few years. I've been seeing your work on Facebook, which I love. Um,
Thanks.
what's that been like for you?
It's really transformative. I'm using a lot of psychoanalysis specifically to help me with this, which is uh using a lot of what's called free association. And as someone who uses intuitive, extroverted intuition, free association is fun for me anyway. But where one is feeling blocked, or where one doesn't, understand where to go or what they've just done, paying attention to language and symbols, sort of a free play of sort of making a growing mess around a thing sounds like the opposite direction someone would want to go for clarity, but for me starts to bring clarity around where I need to go in a creative process. So I still, because there's a lot of wounding with me in my life history, every day I come into this room that I've made into a chaotic sort of chamber for generative art.
Love it.
I still come in
Yes.
and I fight with myself though. Every day there's fear that, hey, I think as an 8 though, in my life, I was like, oh, I feel afraid about something. I need to go make myself do it, which is what I did here too. I'm like, I can see that drawing is the thing for some reason is totally forbidden. So I've got to go make myself do only drawing for a while. And sort of approaching it through a space of play and of psychoanalysis, meaning what's my unconscious trying to say all the time in all these different signs that I can't read unless it's in retrospect, unless it's out here in a different form. What kind of mood was I in where I was drawing birds all the time? Was I feeling trapped? You have to ask yourself, what kind of clues is your psyche leaving behind for you in things that you think you can't say? So that's been a really helpful approach for me, is treat the compartmentalization and the pain part like a puzzle, like an investigation, like an analysis, but there's a seriousness and a play tied up with it.
Yeah.
Am I still making sense?
Of course, absolutely. Okay. And what I'm curious about is this: when I was making art a lot, I think for similar reasons, to help me understand, help me process a lot of stuff that I couldn't access, I found the painting process, I'd pick up the paint. It was very intuitive. It was like just whatever color I reached for, it wasn't, and emotions would come up and I would paint and process the emotion in the process. But then when I look at the painting later, I couldn't necessarily remember what I paint, what the emotion was. I would sometimes remember what it was about, but not always. But I never really went back to sort of analyze and look at something and go, well, what do we see in it now? Like almost having a second bite at the cherry. Like what's it telling me now? And I'm finding that a fascinating part of your process, because I never considered to go back and ask myself those questions as a sort of psychoanalytical process.
Yeah. I came into this in particular with that in mind, that I started drawing when I started to have trouble talking as one of the neurological symptoms of a chronic illness that I have. And because of what I understood of psychoanalysis, I knew that even if I stopped talking completely, I would be having unconscious actions and things still trying to communicate this, vast part of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah.
And so I wanted to see, even if I don't know what I'm doing, what kind of marks am I drawn to make right now? Are they slashing marks? Are they spirals? Am I trying to bust my way out of something? Am I trying to dig my way into something? And it's wildly fruitful. Ooh, I just thought of a book. If you or someone is new to thinking this way, I have a book on my shelf. I don't know if I'll be able to grab it right away, but
Well,
it's called On Not Being Able to Paint, and it's by
oh,
a female Jungian psychoanalyst.
well, it's really interesting because I bought some watercolors recently because they're travel friendly because I can't really set up a space. And I bought a little, watercolor pad, but I've like, oh, I don't feel like opening that because I'm just going to make marks. It's not going to be anything. I'll just throw it away. It's a bit pointless because I can't paint watercolor. I can't make things look like things. And I just didn't feel like, it's just like, oh, I don't want to be a watercolor expert. I don't want to be an expert. I just don't want to train. I just want to play. And so I've
Yes.
been doing more like mindful painting, like with a coloring book, you paint in the lines of something, which I've been enjoying. But there has
Yes.
been this thing to push away just mark making. And I'm finding it really insightful to have this different perspective that I'm like, oh, I might give that a go, see what comes from it.
Yep. Good. I'm glad to hear that from you, because here's what I've been noticing. My whole Patreon project is around talking about how I analyze what I'm trying. And what I tried at first was learning how to do things the right way. Here's a person telling me how to do watercolor correctly, and I'm going to do these exercises. And if I think about my Myers-Briggs personality type, that's absolutely not the way I should have done it. But I was feeling very unsafe. And my
Mm,
3-year-old told the right way people have always have done this. And so in a defensive, unstable frame of mind where painting feels really scary to me, that made sense that I wanted to try it that way, but it wasn't where I was making any headway.
mm,
And I needed some people around me to talk to me about the benefit of making marks, of learning, taking one tool, taking a piece of charcoal and saying, my job today is to figure out all the different things that this piece of charcoal does. What does it do if I spit on it? What does it do if I dip it in alcohol? What does it do if I pound on it with my fist? And if I want to treat it like a scientist, I go back and I write down next to it what it did. And that now I have a chart for when I want to make a mark in the future, some explosion or something. Oh, I know charcoal does that if I draw it over salt. That's there's no way to know that unless dive into these things with a curious mind of a 3-year-old.
mm,
Instead of down sitting her down and saying, don't go outside of the lines, you leave her alone in the art room and she destroys everything and learned so much, you
mm.
know?
I love that.
I,
Destroys the art room, but learns so much.
yes. And, we're adults, we don't destroy anything, but then, we have, evidence that the world didn't fall down, that we fooled around for 8 hours. It's not even really a waste of that much paper. Or, I mean,
No.
I told myself at first, oh, I'm broke, I can't afford to waste these materials this way. But it's it's an essential part of figuring out how can this surprise me, you know?
Mm,
Because why not be enjoying it? Because that's the other part. I thought the whole thing before I started was to get to a picture that I was proud enough to show. And that wasn't therapeutic at all. The part that was therapeutic for me was to get in and to do something my way, regardless of the consequences, which I think is part 8 too.
mm,
But to follow my gut. Um,
yeah.
can I dip charcoal in acrylic paint? What kind of mark does that make? Oh, something I didn't, if I would have seen it, I would have never known that's how you do it, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah, I love it. It's all about giving yourself permission to break all these rules that aren't necessarily ours in the first place, but we're carrying them around.
Yes,
And to just how much we fear the destruction of things. But when we really get into it, we actually don't really destroy anything, but we discover all this stuff
right.
in the process. Um,
Yep.
Yeah.
And you know, it's something that it's empowering because you feel like you've brought something into the world that's never been there before,
Mm.
which is something I think sexual eight needs to see is what comes out of me intuitively that can only happen because of me and my life experience, you
Mm.
know. And and then you think about how can this create, positive change.
Earlier, you mentioned before we got on the call about how you had studied symbols and interpreting symbols. And I'm curious because it feels like you've already got a skill set around interpreting symbols that you've brought into this practice.
I think so. I At first I was panicked when I started teaching myself to draw because I thought, oh, I am, 40 years behind everyone else who starts drawing, as a child and then just keeps going. I was very upset with myself at first that I had robbed myself of this, lifelong experience. But then I'm realizing all my training, I was trained in semiotics, which is the study of signs. And my master's degree is in critical theory and creative research. And I focused on mediality, mediums, the way understanding, like on an information circuit, starts here, ends up here, but it goes through channels, it goes through mediums. And mainly mediality is symbolic symbols in our culture. And so because I'd studied film for years, because I'd played music and written music that didn't necessarily have lyrics, I already had underneath both arms this arsenal of thinking about symbols, um,
Mm.
all of these different ways. How are symbols conveyed nonverbally through using a flute instead of an electric guitar? How is something symbolic conveyed in a film by shooting a scene at night instead of broad daylight? It could be written the same way, and yet there are colorings to things that change our reception of them. And so um, I think that really helped me to, because I'd already been thinking about it in every sense. It helped me hit the ground running with, letting myself make something and then say, what happened here?
Mm.
What does this say? What might it say to other people that's totally different than what it's saying to me?
Mm. No, yeah, I love that. Love it.
Mhm.
And I've been thinking about how did learning that you're a sexual eight help you in your creative practice or process? Because you've mentioned a few times about coming from the gut and things needing to be tangible. And I'm just curious, was there anything that stood out for you when you discovered that?
Yeah. Yes. It was the idea of creating a metaphorical baby with somebody, or that I can't remember. I'm not going to remember the right verbiage around it, but that's
It's fine.
what I took from it was I I need to be having intense sex towards creating this baby for the world. And where's my baby? Because I'm I decided not to have literal children, and I looked around and I realized I'm living this sort of creative reactive life, but there is no work towards the baby.
Mm.
And um, I think that was part of the seeds that started me towards the drawing.
Okay, right.
That drawing would help me figure out a way to something tangible to leave, and also that my baby would be less threatening than I am. That um, my baby could be received with open arms, and it can have indirect messaging that might not feel threatening, where my desire to help and change things, can be received in a way that's really different from the way I'm normally pushed to do it.
Mm. That's really interesting because I like how you've seen it as, okay, this is helping me channel almost what I feel called to do but couldn't express. And I can see that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not moving in that direction. So how can I do that?
Yep.
And I'm almost sensing that you're still in the process, that the baby hasn't been fully cooked yet. It's still becoming.
Yeah, I'm still. It's the gestation period. I can tell is going to be a long one, but it's okay. It's okay
Yeah.
because I wasn't there wasn't the goal of leaving tangible things before. Even
Mm.
making music, we recorded music in the past, but to me it's too ephemeral. Um,
Uh-huh.
Making something physical, um, that someone has to sort of deal with, which is also why I don't do digital art. I feel like they need to be handed something, that they might even be able to feel the surface, the scratches and things.
Mm.
Um, the act of leaving something physically behind,
Yeah.
like a book, like a framed work that
Mm.
someone can interact with, and it's behind glass or it's under a cover, so it feels safer but could still be of help to them.
Yeah, very much so.
And it's a out it's a reaching out instead of a retreat. So if I understand Enneagram, which I barely do, and I apologize to anyone watching this, but I believe 8 vacillates between 5 and 2. And so uh my my analysis part, the 5 in me could spend a lot of time just learning about symbols, but not conveying anything about that. If it wants to hide and protect myself and other people from the way I'm usually received in the world. But my being able to make the baby of my art, I feel, is as much as I can move towards a 2, where I'm handing a thing that in the art world is understood as not, it's not a bomb, it's a baby. I
Mm.
feel like the project that I started on was about maybe trying to deny what was happening with my speech, but also trying to do everything in my power to make up for what was happening with my losing my ability to speak. Uh, but part of my having to do that project and share it with my supporters was having to talk about how much trouble I'm having, how I can't do this thing, you know,
Right.
doing
Yeah.
this because I can't, etc. And it's also a really interesting process because I've set this up through a Patreon to have to share this whole thing with other people, which I normally wouldn't have done. I want to do things by myself, independently. I hate that I am in the position financially where I need patrons, right? And yet being forced into this really uncomfortable position where I need to make something for them every month has become a great lesson for
Mm.
me about community and allowing people to be supportive, and that my sharing my struggle honestly and my weaknesses honestly, it might sometimes be the most helpful thing to them.
Mm.
I get that feedback, thank you for sharing that you were having so much trouble with this. Oh.
Yeah, I find that interesting too, because I tend to hide all of that as well.
Mhm.
And the sharing of the weaknesses, even though I'm not Nate, is very uncomfortable. And so, yeah. But I do hear this again and again, that people really appreciate someone else's creative efforts and sharing the story of how hard it was, or what, of what's behind it, as well as the thing itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I share the finished thing on Facebook, and then I share everything I go through with my patrons,
Oh,
how I didn't know what to do. And here's 5 pages of mess. And then I had 3 days of crying, and the mess and the crying made me realize this. And then this started to grow. There's always a story behind everything
there is always
that,
a story.
yeah. And I think I started to say this earlier and it didn't get out, but or maybe I did, and I'm about to repeat myself, and I'm sorry. But the healing part for your wounding in creativity, I think, is about the process. And you've got to be in love with how scary and hard the process is, and how messy it is. That part has to be part of what you embrace that you're in with. Because I feel like that makes it more valuable, more special. I mean, I see people reproducing the same type of picture over and over again that they're selling. They get successful drawing a woman, holding a flower. And so for the next 10 years, they make 100 different versions of that. And the struggle is not there anymore. There's no questioning. There's no precarity. There's no possibility of it totally falling apart. They've done it, every time. And so I'm going to be a jerk and just throw out the idea that, what if that isn't being creative anymore? Creativity is a little bit of a storm with yourself. It has to be. Not saying you've got to be a tortured, sick artist, but I think it helps us psychically and bodily to just be trying to do something a little bit more than we think we're capable of doing.
Because creativity, it's about creating. Like, we're all human. We create every day in every moment, which I'm understanding more and more from talking to all the different types. And yeah, when we go to bring something new forth, there is something scary in that. We might fail, it might screw up, it might get criticized, we might hate it, it might make us feel sad. There's so
It
many things that yeah.
That's a big one. If someone actually can see a little bit too much of me from this thing,
Yeah. Yeah, what if you do
what
see
if
my soul?
some, what if no one understands me after I make this thing? I mean, there's so much that we want from the making of the thing, but you've got to. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, not at all. I liked it was great what you added in, and it's making me think about how the process needs to be a bit scary, and then we need to put the thing out there and let it be whatever it is. You almost put it out without attempting to have non-attachment to it. It's now needs to exist on its own. And yeah, I might protect it, I might care for it, but if it gets criticized, it gets criticized. It's yeah. I sold a painting once, and all I think about is it was terrible. And it must have been a pity purchase, And yet, after I spoke with my Enneagram mentor last night, it's about finding what was positive. Like, don't look for what was negative or what wasn't good enough or what was critical. Notice that and look for the positive instead. And, as a 7, they say we always see the positive, but because this wound is so deep in so many ways, that's not what's happening. And I need to go back and look at that and go, hey, someone wanted to buy a piece of my art. It spoke to them in some way. I enjoyed painting it. I really liked the fact it had yellow in it. It was abstract.
Yeah.
I'm pleased that spoke to them.
Yes.
And that's hard. Like,
Yeah.
I feel that. That's, hard to say.
I was suggested an exercise specifically by a woman who's become sort of my mentor, um, because I was not looking for anything positive at the beginning. I was just upset with myself for not already knowing how to do everything, which was
Mm,
crazy.
crazy.
Yeah. So she had me do a a review of everything I did. Every single time I made something, I'd have to stop and look at it, even if it was marks,
Okay.
and say, first of all, what do I like about this? What about this have I never done before or have never tried before? What did I improve on something I was trying to improve? What's good? And then next was, what do I want to learn next? What do I want to what would I do differently if I were to do this again? And it's it's just a yes and, instead of, which is the basis of all like comedic improvisation.
Mm,
Yes, everything. And now what? Well, I can say I hate it because of this, or I can say now I can clearly see what I want to do differently. Thank you. Thank you, shitty painting, for being a little roadmap toward me feeling happier about the next one.
I'm going to practice that. I'm going to pull out my blank watercolor and just hit it up and see what happens, and then practice noticing the positive.
Yeah, because she said to me, because I'm not putting myself through art school, I will never have an art teacher over my shoulder looking at where I could improve. And the only way I am going to get that is to step outside and become that for myself, without being the art teacher that would make you quit art school. Oh, that's
Mm,
terrible. Would never do that. They need to tell you, you did this right and you did this right. Where do you think you want to improve? Do you want to learn to do eyes better? You know, and so you have to put on that separate hat.
yeah. The supportive parent role is more sustainably effective and healing than the critical parent role.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah.
I think a lot of us carry the critical parent role a little bit too easily and need to find the supportive parent. I know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a practice. I can't remember what the studies, but studies in cognition show that we tend to remember and fixate on the negative so much more than the positive. And it's how we learn. But we can learn differently. That's wired into us. Being aware of that, and then having the supportive self step in, I think, is crucial.
One thing I haven't asked is what supports you to be creative?
It's astonishingly essential for me to be left entirely alone, meaning my own space separate from everyone else, and even like creating a boundary, like no one can come in here or knock on the door. And also that I'm not too reliant on what people are saying is the correct way to do it. I have to be allowed to do it my way, and like, even in this shameful, messy way, I've got to forge my own path in a way. It can be my own path towards this very specific thing I want to learn that everybody's doing, but I've still got to um, have a very separate space where I get to do it my way.
Mm. And I love your space. I don't think it's shamefully messy at all. I think it's wonderfully messy. I'm somewhat
Thank
envious. And I know you've made quite a lot of things over your, these exploration of drawing and painting, but is there something that you're most proud of?
Yes, yes. I asked myself one day, what would it look like if I did a self portrait as a homunculus? So a homunculus is it's if you look it up, it's this little drawing of a person that's very distorted depending on how the brain pays attention to different nerve endings. So a homunculus usually has huge hands and a big tongue, and wide nose and eyes, because the brain's really focusing on that. So that people have tried to draw the human as the brain sort of sees your shape. Do you know what I mean?
Sort of.
So, okay, if you look up cortical homunculus, you'll see
Okay.
funny drawing of human shapes.
Okay.
And so I want to draw a picture of myself right now while I'm learning how to draw. I want to draw this picture of me as I feel right now, and it came out. It came pouring out of me very intuitively. The only thing I followed was, what if I tried to draw this thing? And so what I ended up drawing,
Wow.
I was surprised that I ended up drawing myself naked, which, sharing my art, feels like I'm naked.
Mm-hmm.
And my head feels empty quite often, and that's also alluding to the chronic illness that I have. My head feels swollen and inflamed, but also full of big ideas. And I was having trouble talking, and so I was making my mouth half shut but bursting open. And I ended up making this huge leading left hand with the paintbrush that it's sort of out of proportion of everything else, that my body is really hanging on to what's happening with my hand. And I made the brush part of me, because there isn't, you're supposed to be drawing a body map, but I ended up incorporating the brush. And so it ended up being an image that was surprising to me, and I knew it would be sort of upsetting to other people. In ways, it's sort of a confrontational or a violent picture, in that there's, a partial head and the stitching and the nudity. and then I got to practice dealing with all the different ways people reacted to it, and it wasn't all positive and okay.
Yeah. Wow. And it's funny because it is, when you first see it, there is a shockness to it because it's so different and unexpected. But I honestly, the more I looked at it, the more I sort of fell in love with it. It just, yeah, I couldn't say why. It just grew on me. But I didn't even notice the hole in the head. I didn't see that until you pointed it out. And I know I
Mm-hmm.
feel, a bit like that sometimes as well because of my chronic illness stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Where you just don't know what you know. You no longer know what's up there. It's empty, but it's not empty. It's sort of full. But of what? Of what?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. That's amazing. And I love that it's a tangible thing that you can show us as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for letting me show you. Oh, and I apologize if that image was upsetting to anyone.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been a beautiful conversation. I've loved learning about creativity from your perspective and your experience. Thank you so much for sharing it all with us. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fulfilling for me too.